Morning, everyone. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Don Stacy. I'm going to read a story out of the Tales of Bizarre and Unnatural. This next one is titled More Torsion for Thompson. Gabriel Thompson was an engineer who worked with a very immaterial substance, dreams. Thompson designed dreams for people to have during their regular sleeping hours. They would choose to have these synthetic, fabricated dreams rather than their own for several different reasons. The predominant one being to avoid as much as possible the dreams they would otherwise normally have. A Thompson dream was guaranteed to be two things. The client could be assured of a personal dream, one that would involve him or her in a very central role, and he or she could expect the dream to be something other than unpleasant. This promise from service provider to client had never been breached since the company's inception. Since the first sale of a set of a single night's dreams to the first recipient. Everyone has responded favorably to Gabriel Thompson's revolutionary new product, which has been proven time and time again to be psychologically safe. Not only psychologically safe, but to some extent even beneficial, or so several independent researchers tell us. Even I have purchased a few evenings' worth of dreams from the Thompson catalog, which is available either on the internet or in physical form sent through the Postal Service to your residence. I received my catalog just a couple of weeks ago, and as recommended for the first-time users, I set aside an entire weekend to experience the initial two sets of dreams. The first transmitted on Friday night, and then the second on Saturday night. By using this service, I had to sign a legally binding contract wherein I agreed not to divulge the contents of any dream I may have purchased. Breach of contract results in what you might expect. No more service, you are out of luck no matter how badly you want it. Not to mention the monetary dangers which you have to pay. The monetary damages. So, what is it about dreams in general which people find so difficult to deal with? So much so that they are willing to have their natural dreams supplanted by a Thompson's synthetic dream, or synth dream. Well, obviously everyone wishes to avoid nightmares. This is self-evident. But there are many other kinds of dreams which are not nightmares and yet are not particularly pleasant either. It is this psychic region in which the Thompson synth dream proves quite welcome. A client no longer need worry about experiencing a dream which turns out to be puzzling or disturbing in any fashion. The Thompson synth dream will supplant this with something guaranteed not to be unpleasant, and not erotic, mind you, but merely not unpleasant. Thompson wrestled for months over the moral question of just how much pleasure should be allowed to a client while experiencing one of these synthetic dreams. He decided that some sexual situations could only be alluded to, while still others could be engaged in. Anything short of causing a typical man to have an erection or a typical woman to have some vaginal lubrication would be allowed. The Thompson synth dream would never be prurient or shameless. Outlets for these dream transmission devices appeared in all the strip malls across the country, not unlike those shops featuring cell phones. The equipment itself was not particularly cumbersome, about the size of a clock radio. Each client would also have to ingest a capsule containing nano-sized transceivers, which would be absorbed quickly into the bloodstream and then be deposited throughout the brain, bridging synapses and fundamentally altering the client's unconscious mind, rendering it completely receptive to the transmissions from the bedside device. Yes, I have given a wholehearted endorsement for this product, one based on complete satisfaction. To be quite honest, I would not want anything more than to experience a set of Gabriel Thompson dreams each and every night, not missing a single night. Because even a single night having to endure my own odd, shadowy, labyrinthine, and bedeviling, mist-ridden illusions would be one night too many. Brief pause here so I can light up a smoke. I've been thinking of doing a complete reading of Joseph Conrad's The Nigger and the Narcissus, and then volunteer, submit it to Vox Audio or whatever. It'd be a long haul. I'd have to be systematic about it, I think. Anyway, that's for a later time. All right. Yes, I said all that a few months ago, and now I have come to deeply regret my endorsement. Because I have sung the praises of Gabriel Thompson's synthdreams, I have become partially responsible for the thousands of cases of psychosis which have erupted across the country in every city. This is an epidemic of unprecedented scope and severity. I pace about my house each day regretting my decision to lend my name to the promotion of a product which has proven to be so dangerous to the community at large. An alarming percentage of former synthdream users are now walking about in a helpless state, their minds having suffered a psychotic break. Their daily experience now one of sheer paranoia and delirium. These people are highly volatile and completely unpredictable. The police departments in every city in the country have been besieged with the task of trying to preserve the public order, but a truly mindless anarchy has arisen in a perverse situation of all against all. Each night is an appalling torment while listening to the yells of hostile intent and the screams of both fear and pain. The sounds reaching my bedroom window, which I have to keep open to cope with the terrible heat. The heat this summer is almost unendurable, sleep impossible to come by. At first light, I pull the curtains aside and look outdoors, out across the street to the nearby homes, the front lawns littered with bodies. The appearance of sunlight seems to subdue these people thus afflicted. In fact, I've seen some of them led around by children. The children apparently play some sort of improvised games with them. And yet after sunset, these wandering, crippled beings again turn unpredictable and frequently savage. The synthdream craze was so widespread that that is the tragedy in this case. If all could have been prevented, it all could have been prevented. Certainly if Thompson had not invented his device, then none of this would have ever happened. But what good is hindsight? When I look at this situation objectively, I can see that there could easily be thousands of people who would take a great deal of satisfaction in killing me. After all, it was my endorsement of Thompson's despicable gadget that helped to create all the fuss in the first place. Many people finally violated their contracts, no longer seeing any reason to uphold their end of an agreement which has since been responsible for so much misery. They have disclosed what some of these dreams were truly like, which Thompson had designed as safe replacements for the real thing. All these disclosures had one thing in common: although the dreamer was never killed or suffered any form of physical injury, this same poor individual underwent some very perplexing experiences indeed so perplexing that the dreamer would necessarily have to forget them immediately upon awakening. This forgetting mechanism, which Thompson had built into the total experience, had some desirable effects, of course, and some very unintentional ill effects, which were not discovered until the great wave of anarchy had already commenced. And there have been several waves since then. Each night produces a new wave, a new onslaught of random riot, fear, and despair. Even the forgetting mechanism, which Thompson must have thought quite sufficient in its function, turned out to be inadequate, but people only realized this after several weeks of using the device. The burden of guilt, I feel, can never be fully conveyed. My venal endorsement of Thompson's gadget has helped to destroy the world. If only I had not been so credulous, so enthralled with the latest scientific development. But that's how all of us are, enchanted by the latest twist in technology. Here, I thought once, the mind's own interior had become a frontier of positive change. There was a good chance to improve our lot upon this planet to which humankind has been assigned. How woefully wrong I turned out to be. The substantial receipts which I earned for the endorsement, which was aired repeatedly on all the television networks, paid for my impregnable home security system. My home is enclosed by an impervious wall of electromagnetic energy so powerful that anything which touches it is instantly vaporized. I have a store of food and water in the basement which should last as long as a year if necessary. I have surmised that after 1 year those afflicted will have killed off one another completely. But if my guess proves incorrect, I cannot see any hope for the recovery of the human race. Paranoia and dementia will have destroyed us altogether. Some days great crowds of the demented advance upon my home and are instantaneously vaporized. They have acquired some organizing principle, apparently. What I have once thought of as a completely chaotic activity on the part of the afflicted now seem to be showing signs of cohesive cooperation. Perhaps some primitive instincts have come into play here. That could explain it, but who can say? This pandemic of psychosis is unprecedented. The history of medicine cannot provide a single instance to which we can compare it. On other days, the neighborhood in front of my home is wonderfully free of prowlers. I have watched these curious beings with the aid of my telescope, and at first I felt only amusement as I saw them roam randomly about as though in the grip of some inexplicable motivating force. But then, as I say, they somehow acquired a direction, and their aim couldn't have been more apparent. They sought revenge. They wanted to kill me, since they understood deep within their shattered reason that I was responsible for their condition. On other days, the neighborhood in front of let's see, condition. Okay, I could only hope that the oncoming mass would be vaporized at a sufficient rate that the security system itself would not suffer an overload. A smell began to linger in the air, a mixture of ozone and incinerated human flesh. On the first day, I noticed that I was overcome with nausea. Waves of human bodies continued to walk toward my home, only to disappear within an electric blue arc, which itself disappeared the very next instant. These pulses of energy from the home security system were triggered by proximity. Bodily movement of precisely 20 yards from the house would result in an obliterative strike of a powerful electromagnetic field. I remained thus under siege for several weeks. Poor fellow. One morning I fell out of bed, groggy and sleepless, and walked over to a large picture window in front of which was my telescope. I drew the curtains aside for a view of the neighborhood across the street, and not a single prowler appeared. I waited 10 minutes and then another 10 minutes, and still I did not see a single prowler. An intemperate hope bloomed within me, and I allowed myself the thought that they had all been wiped out by my home security system and others like it. After 2 hours of constant vigilance, not seeing a single movement anywhere, I churned up as much courage as possible and stepped out onto the front porch. The air outdoors still had a lingering stench to it from all the countless vaporizations. I could hear birds chirping, a light wind rustling the leaves of some nearby elm trees. The earth seemed subdued and quiescent. I went back inside the house and down into the basement where the control panel for the security system was located. I pulled a small lever through a 180-degree arc and shut down the vaporization unit. Having now committed myself in this fashion, I went back outdoors. While walking around the house with extreme care, I was suddenly taken by surprise. Off to my left, I saw a single prowler in the near distance, perhaps 30 yards out. This being seemed to grow aware of my presence. It gazed at me for a moment, showing a sign of faint recognition out of the depth of its ravaged consciousness. In another moment, I realized it was too late for me to run back into the house and power up the vaporization unit once again. I had made a serious strategical error. With mounting dismay, I saw the creature walk toward the house with an unmistakable murderous intent. Like all the others, it wanted to exact revenge upon me. I retreated into the house and searched for anything which could be used as a weapon. I raced into the kitchen and grabbed out a sturdy meat-carving knife from a drawer filled with cooking implements. Now armed with this knife, I felt emboldened and returned outdoors, only to see that the crazed individual had regressed much further toward the house. Very soon it stepped to within a few feet of me. I looked into its eyes, the eyes of a former human being, now animated by a single obsessive desire to destroy me. I gripped the knife tighter in my hand, squeezing the handle hard. I looked into the dull, lightless eyes of my enemy. He was being guided by the instinctive promptings of revenge. I waved the knife in front of him to ward him off, but this he ignored and kept advancing. He backed me into the house and was nearly close enough now that I could lunge out and swipe the blade of the knife across his neck, but then he halted and began to howl in a way that left my blood cold. I had never heard anything like it, a howl filled not with anguish but rage. He suddenly leaped at me, and I jumped to the side and fell to the floor, still gripping the knife. He scrambled on top of me and began flailing his fists at the side of my head. While being pummeled thus, I drove the knife into his side. He let out a roar of pain and pushed away from me, staggered back with one hand pressed to his side to staunch the blood. He sagged to his knees and then fell onto his side. In another moment he appeared lifeless. I pressed my boot against his shoulder and the body remained limp, blood pooling on the floor next to his wound. I went back outside thinking where this one came from there was sure to be more, and they would be the most dangerous of any, having survived the anarchy of all against all for weeks now. Once more, I walked slowly around the edge of my property while scanning the horizon as I proceeded with each step, finally satisfied. But no one else was out there for the time being. I returned inside and dragged the corpse of my attacker across the floor of the front room and out through the door onto the porch where I waited for several moments to catch my breath. Not wishing to view the sight of a corpse every time I went down the front steps, I went to the trouble of digging a knee-deep hole in the front yard right next to the porch. Then I dragged the body down to the steps from the porch and over to the nearby hole where I waited once again to catch my breath, and then shoved my boot against the body and watched it topple into the shallow grave. Slowly, I shoveled dirt back over the body. Then I went back into the house to wait for the next random attack. Oh, that's a rather grim situation. I don't know how I ever came up with all this stuff, but I did. Anyway, until next time, or until I have some thought occur to me on the current situations of the day, of which there are several very disturbing ones. In psychology, they have an interesting concept, internalize, or internalization. To internalize something, what does that mean exactly? To take it into yourself? What do they mean by that? It's something that, generally speaking, is not particularly desirable, because it's something that's done unconsciously. When you absorb some element out of your environment. And I'll give you a good example. When I was 19 and 20, I was how to put it, nearly defenseless psychologically. I was I was in a pretty serious way. I had lost my voice, so to speak. I'd lost the power of speech, aphasia, and I climbed out of that, began to interact with people again, and I had these, it was like I had no buffer at all. These impressions just swarmed into me from all directions. It was hard to handle. And if I smoked cannabis, all bets were off. I was done for. I usually got frightened and wound up thinking repeatedly about something that probably wasn't true. It was just conjecture on my part. basically found things up. All kinds of thoughts people have about how others view them, or what is the proper way to behave when in Rome, do as the Romans, and so on. And you're thinking, well, perhaps I haven't really figured this situation out yet. Maybe I don't quite understand all the people involved, all the dynamics fully, and so on. And probably not. How could you? If you just step in from the outside, you're not going to know very much or anything at all about a situation except through sheer intuition. And that's where a very sensitive person has an advantage. They have extremely good intuition. Their instincts are sharp. And in some instances, it's almost as though they can look at you and it's as though they can read your very thoughts just by looking at your face. They do that, they can do that, I think. This is how I theorize it anyway. Because they're utterly honest with themselves. They don't hide anything from themselves. And since we all have this ground of being, which is our emotional life, which these feelings can come into play at any moment. An extraordinary range that in practically an infinite number of ways, literature through the ages has codified and presented to us and handed down to us. And that's why the teaching of literature is so valuable. And unfortunately, the style of language changes over time, and to truly enjoy it in full measure, you have to devote yourself to it, literature, and I believe I have, and I've been how to put it, well, let's say I've had a lifetime unfulfilled love affair with literature, meaning that I've never been published. It's becoming my principal obsession. And it really does animate just about everything I do anymore. And maybe at this late focused date, you might say, I might actually have a shot at it. What do you think? Till next time.